But
what about pain? Does it influence the way how, like, for example, if we take ibuprofen or acetamin for a prolonged period of time, does it change the way body experience? Does the body develops resistance?
Yeah, somewhat. I mean, that's certainly true, but it's not. It's not. It's not like morphine or other similar drugs where you have to keep more and more and more and more in order to inhibit your pain. But for those drugs, what are called non-steroidal anti-inflammatories, like ibuprofen and Aleve is another brand name. They don't. That really isn't a big problem. That reduced effect over time. As physicians that prescribe those will tell you, the much bigger problem is not that they become less effective, but more that they start affecting, your stomach, for example. So but you're right that anything that decreases pain can cause plastic changes, but frequently those are in the right direction. In other words, so as I mentioned, in the post-operative situation, post-surgical situation, if you effectively treat pain, then the people are much less likely to have post-operative pain and chronic pain. So they can go home after their operation and not need strong, painkillers.
What is the most efficient way of pain treatments nowadays? The most efficient pain treatment approach?
Well, like I keep saying, different pains are different, right? So if your pain is, stomach pain, you don't want to take ibuprofen. But, and so most efficient, I think it's going to depend on the type of pain. As I mentioned, morphine doesn't work very well with this A delta pain, sharp pain, and so it depends on the type of pain. And so, but you're quite right that there's a lot of things that are being developed that are not these. The drugs that we've had around for 100 years or longer. There's newer things that are being developed, and it's not just drugs too. So I've done a lot of work with hypnosis and hypnotic analgesia, and no drugs at all. But you can actually do surgery in a patient who's very susceptible to hypnosis, and then there's at Stanford there's a situation where you have to, with little boys who have a problem with their bladder and the muscles that control the bladder, where you actually have to put a catheter up into their bladder, but they have to be awake for this. And so you can imagine you have a little 3-year-old boy you have to do to this too. They're screaming their heads off, and it's horrible. And so, but what we've done now a couple times is put the child under under hypnosis, and children are much more susceptible to hypnosis than adults in general, and told them they're at Disneyland, and they're riding the Dumbo ride at Disneyland, and they're laying there, big smile on their face while you're doing the catheterization. And so it's not traumatic. And so anyway, that's one thing that's been around for a long time and is much underused. And it's similar idea. It's just a little more direct to use hypnosis. But yeah, I mean, with virtual reality, you're convincing the person that they're doing something entirely different from laying there under a procedure. And so that's virtual reality. So it comes back to the ability of the brain to disconnect itself from
the
that
body
stimulation
experience.
Yeah. If you think back to animals. So if let's say you were a monkey, and you are attacked by a lion or a tiger, whatever, and you're bit. So what are you supposed to do? You're supposed to get away from that stimulus, right? So that is fight or flight. You're supposed to remove yourself from that situation. So that's very activating. That's what we call sympathetic. We're activating the whole sympathetic nervous system, causing changes in blood flow. Your muscles become much more powerful. And during that time, pain is not really helpful, right? Pain can slow you down because other than it's supposed to activate you to move. But then after that, after you get away, it becomes a liability. So that type of pain. So this initial pain is caused, you're getting because of the wound. And remember, I told you these A fibers, the A deltas, are rapidly activated and then shut down. So you're supposed to get away, but then what are you supposed to do? You're supposed to crawl into your cave and hold still, which is exactly the opposite. So it's both pain in both cases. The pain in the first case is telling you, it's making you move. The pain in the other case, after you crawl into your cave, you don't want that kind of pain anymore. You want to hold still and recuperate. And so if you move, you reactivate those myelinated fibers, so you don't move. At the same time, you have burning pain going on. The unmyelinated pain fibers going on, reminding you to hold still. And when these fibers are activated, you also bring in your immune system, your inflammatory response to start healing the tissue. So it's probably not what you're asking about, but I think it's
no. So I would like to say something. So the experience of pain is actually there is a strong connection between body healing itself and pain, right? Biological connection. So the thing is, if we're putting too much blockage on the experience of pain, it influences actually our body ability to heal itself, right?
So the opposite can be true also. So, yes, you want pain to help you recover your tissue, your body recover. But, at the same time, you want to minimize two things. One is you moving, right? Because that can make things worse. But also, if you have too much pain, you cause this reorganization, this plasticity in the spinal cord, which can lead to chronic pain. So does that make sense? So you want to, if you have too much pain block, then that can be bad. If you have not enough pain block, then that can be bad.
What is the best painkiller nowadays? What is the best approaches, and how we can actually influence our body to experience less pain? What do we know?
So there are drug approaches and there are non-drug approaches. So among the non-drug approaches, you have sort of interventions and you have psychological approaches. So a lot of people with chronic pain benefit from psychological approaches to help them function in the presence of the pain, or with hypnosis, as I mentioned, you can turn down the pain. And I'll get to drugs in a second, other non-drugs approaches. So my group is working for a long time with gene therapy for chronic pain. So, looks like it's not available in treatment humans yet, but it's getting there. Then but then there's another approach where we've used what's called transcutaneous or transcranial magnetic stimulation. So this is used mainly for depression, and it's quite effective, but we found that it can be helpful for pain too.
Oh, really? Interesting.
So, yes, we've used it for fibromyalgia, for example, patients with fibromyalgia pain. So basically, there's this big magnet that you put on the head, and pulses, you put it in the right place, and it produces pulses. And then what happens is, nerves act sort of as wires, and so you have, electrical current going down those nerves. Well, if you put a wire in a magnetic field, you can actually create an electrical current in that wire. Conversely, if you already have a current going down the wire and you put it into a pulsed magnetic field, you can interrupt that current, right? So you can think of this in terms of nerves. You can either enhance neural transmission from one place to another, or you can inhibit it doing this by using magnetic fields. So we did one study in volunteers where we used a combination of capsaicin, which is the stuff in pepper spray, and combined with heat to produce pretty strong pain in volunteers. Had to pay them a lot, but and then we used transcranial magnetic stimulation, or TMS, and we showed that we could bring their pain basically down to zero by using the right configuration of this. So again, no drugs for that. In terms of drugs, probably the hottest thing right now is that is in final clinical studies toward approval, or I mentioned sodium channel blockers before, the canes. Well, the thing is, there are 10 different of these sodium channels, types of sodium channels, and only some of them are involved with pain, and some of them are involved with other things. And so the ideal thing is to just block the sodium channels that are involved with pain. And so a couple of companies are developing drugs that selectively block those sodium channels. And, as I said, one of them is in the final clinical trials before it gets approved, but it looks like it works very well in those trials. So,
is there any chance for addiction to those type of things?
No.
I mean,
No. No, that works very
chances
differently.
for side effects can be
Yeah, no, because they very selectively act on only the sodium channels that are involved with pain. They're not even involved with touch. So, just in these peripheral nerves. They don't do anything in the brain. So there's this particular sodium channel is either not present or very, very low levels in the brain. And so that risk of any kind of addiction or tolerance, what's called, is pretty low or non-existent. So it's I think it's very promising.
Can we change the way our body experiences pain via certain diet? Can we change how our body experiences pain via the way the habits in our life? Or, for example, what kind of loads we have during, and what type of activities we have during the day? Can we manage the pain via those little things like changes in diet, changes in certain activities? Like you mentioned very interesting fact about the morphine and about the way our body reacts to it. And we know that certain people do certain physical activities. And the thing is, some physical activities can actually hurt their experience in terms of pain. Even some people, unfortunately, they don't feel well their bodies, and sometimes they hurt their own bodies. If, for example, person with a chronic condition goes to the gym and puts too much load, it actually hurt a lot the way how brain reacts to the pain, right?
Yeah, I mean, if you go to the gym and you overdo it, you actually cause, muscle injury, which, so it's not necessarily the brain, right? But you're quite right about, the key thing here is that previous experience can modify how sensitive you are to pain and how you handle pain. So even, premature babies, if they have a lot of, needle, injections and IVs put in and other things that are potentially painful, they become hypersensitive to pain later in life, or they can. And, the other thing that impacts all this is hormonal fluctuations. So women during their menstrual cycle, there are times, so estrogen inhibits pain. And so when your estrogen levels are very low, you actually are more sensitive to pain. But the other thing, so, people learn or should learn how to manage. So people with some types of chronic pain, for example, like low back pain or something, if they do a lot of stretching or they do yoga, that can actually improve not their perception of pain so much as the actual pain itself. Does that make sense?
A person experiences pain, meaning that there's inflammation in the body. Is it true?
Generally, yes. But you can have inflammation without pain. But generally speaking, inflammation, which has a function, but it definitely can increase your sensitivity to painful stimulation. So, which is how things like ibuprofen work, right? Because they're blocking that inflammation. Inflammatory molecules that are important for pain. But so one of my favorites is inflammatory molecules. It's called interleukin-6. And what's really interesting about interleukin-6 is if you have a lot of interleukin-6, you drive the expression of oxytocin receptors. I've done a lot of work with oxytocin as an analgesic. And so what that means is if you're producing a lot of interleukin-6, then oxytocin becomes much more effective as an analgesic, whether it comes from giving a patient oxytocin or if it's their own oxytocin, because we all make oxytocin. And so, but the other aspect of this, and so the body tends to reuse molecules for different purposes. So just before you give birth, you have a big release of interleukin-6 as well as other similar molecules. And so those drive the expression of oxytocin receptors in the uterus and ripen it, basically make it sensitive to oxytocin, so that the oxytocin you produce or that they give you through intravenously, which is called Pitocin in that case, same thing. That allow the interleukin-6 and other molecules that are released at that time enable oxytocin or Pitocin to cause the uterine contractions that you need to, give birth. So as I said, the system at the same time, if you don't have, IL-6 is a strong inflammatory agent, so it can have. So in some cases, you want to block it, and so. One thing we found is if you give in patients where we're using oxytocin to treat their migraine headache pain, if they take a ibuprofen beforehand, it blocks the effect of the oxytocin. So it's because it's blocking the production of interleukin-6.
when we're talking about pain management, about anesthesia, pain treatment after the anesthesia, what risks for the health exist and overall for the human body? Because why I am pointing this out, why I think this question is very important. Honestly, especially here, we live in California, and I'm always so fascinated by the idea that almost lots of people had surgery, aesthetic surgery, or any kind of surgery. And a lot of people perceive that surgery is something, nothing to do. Or, a lot of people perceive that I will just do, and there is no outcomes. I will just, be happy and look better, and etc., etc. And I think it's very important. I think that's very important to mention what actually side effects and how anesthesia is actually influence the body.
So, because opiates like morphine and fentanyl are used widely post-operatively, and there are other things too, but those are the main ones. There are big problems with those, and so, for example, the opiates cause constipation, and so it used to be, it still is some places, that you can't go home after surgery unless you show, bowel activity, and so it sounds minor, relatively speaking, but in fact, it's the biggest complaint patients have who are on chronic opiates. So, for example, if you have some kind of cancer pain, you're typically put on opiates like morphine or fentanyl. And, the biggest problem people complain about is constipation. But, and the other big thing is that with repeated use, the effectiveness of the drug goes down. So you always need more and more and more of the drug to fight the pain. And of course, one of the major problems we've seen in this country particularly is when patients are prescribed opiates when they go home after surgery, opiate pills, either some of them become addicted, or if they have a bottle of pills in their medicine cabinet in their bathroom, someone else might get a hold of those pills and use them. And so I think, so yes, there are pretty dramatic downsides to particularly the use of opiates. But on the other hand, right now, that's the best we've got for handling strong pain. And as far as anesthesia is concerned, the biggest problem with anesthesia, in my mind, has to do with the age of the patient, and that they're older patients that undergo general anesthesia, particularly if it's a prolonged surgery, they can have cognitive problems, deficits that happen. And it's
question. I won't take
surprised at all. Yeah.
Last question about gene therapy, because I see more and more actually approaches to the gene therapy, and more available, not for the general public, which is available in terms of information. We know that it's there. So what do you think the main hurdles? Because even in terms of like science-wise, we have so many already in such a stage of the development that can actually, I believe that gene therapy can actually be publicly broadly available. What do you think is the main barriers to make gene therapy more, publicly accessible?
Yeah. So it's an interesting story, interesting history to gene therapy. So in the 1980s, I think, maybe early 90s, there was a case of these people at, I think, University of Pennsylvania that were developing a gene therapy for some respiratory problem. And this is pretty early days of gene therapy, and they basically, it looks like, gave the patient too much, and he developed a reaction to the gene, to the transgene, and died. And like an 18-year-old, relatively healthy young man. So that scared people. That event scared people from gene therapy for many years. I mean, NIH would not fund or very few grants in gene therapy. No drug companies or other companies were interested. Investors weren't interested because they were all scared of it, basically. It was a psychological thing. Not that it wasn't going to work, but rather that, you know, they didn't want to be liable for things like that happened in Pennsylvania. So, interestingly, though, in the last maybe 10 years, there's been a real resurgence of interest, and now even large drug companies are looking at gene therapy and are developing gene therapies. So the problem has been more psychological than anything else. Now the agents and the methods have improved quite a bit, and so there's probably additional safety factors that are available now that weren't before. But I think, you know, as I said, you know, and in addition to do clinical studies of gene therapy, there's another, so you have to get approval from the Food and Drug Administration, the FDA, as you do with drugs, but there's a whole nother level of scrutiny that comes with gene therapy. So I think those are the issues. I mean, I'm a big proponent of it myself. I mean, we were the first to actually develop a gene therapy for pain process. We actually use, so gene therapy generally uses viruses that have been changed and to get rid of their toxic effects, but enable to get genes you want into the cells you want. And that, because viruses are really good at that. That's what they do for a living normally. So we actually have always used what are herpes viruses. So these are the viruses that cause cold sores and change so that they can't replicate, which means, you know, they're not toxic. But what do these viruses do for a living normally is get into your sensory neurons and stay there. So 85% of the population, probably you and I both, have these herpes viruses sitting in our sensory neurons now. You know, when we got chickenpox when we were a kid. And so they don't go away. They're not always active.
But they're there.
They're there. And so two of the hardest things about gene therapy has been getting things into the right cell and duration of expression, duration of efficacy. And so, you know, because we're so interested in peripheral nerves and inhibiting pain at the source, it made a lot of sense for us. So anyway, the point is, I think you're going to see you are seeing much more gene therapy, not for pain, but for other things coming along now. But I know of at least one big company that is now pursuing gene therapy for pain. So I think it's for chronic pain, which is, I think, going to be wonderful. You know, and you know, think of it, if you have, let's say, phantom limb pain, and you apply a herpes virus that decreases the number of sodium channels to the nerves, the cut nerves, the damaged nerves, you should prevent the phantom limb, and potentially be able to treat people who already have it.
Actually, I mean, very interesting case. So what are the main side effects
Of gene therapy?
Yes. What can be the worst You mentioned it can.
Yeah, if you screw things up, you could kill someone. Yes, that's a bad side
Mm-hmm.
effect. But and it depends what you're trying to do. I mean, so generally speaking, the approaches people are taking now, it's hard to imagine a side effect. You now are able to cure people who have hemophilia. Now, what's the side effect of that? I suppose if you did things wrong,
Mm-hmm.
then the body would react as if this is a foreign body, or the protein is even a foreign body. So, like if you had something that's not supposed to be inside you, the body attacks it, right?
But that's only if something will grow, if something will not stop, if things will done, if things, everything was done in the right way, there is no side effects, right?
It shouldn't be.
Okay, understood.
So,
Because people can mess up with everything. People from, can die from assault easily if they will eat too much of it. Anyway, I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much for answering all my questions, and thank you so much for being with us. It was a pleasure.
and the pleasure's all mine. So thank you so much for taking the time. Right? It was nice meeting you too.